So our next speakers will discuss the state of education in Kansas going forward. So we kind of set the table with Senator Hill, who talked about the state of education in Kansas right now, some of the things that are at the forefront of our minds. It's the forefront of everybody's mind in the nation as we look at the NAEP scores, we look at our system in comparison to how we're competitive as far as giving our children, our grandchildren, students the opportunity to be competitive in the marketplace. And so we had some practical ideas of how to do that. And now we turn to Dave Trabert will begin with this conversation. And most of you probably know Dave Trabert, CEO of Kansas Policy Institute, but you may not know, I learned very early on about his passion for education that allows him, that he believes that every student should have opportunities. He's the lead author of several books, one you will find out here on the table, 8 Things to Know About Running for School Board, and his publications include Student-Focused Funding Solutions for Public Education and Removing Barriers to Public Education. He was appointed a member of the Kansas K-12 Student Achievement and Efficiency Commission. He serves on the Tax and Fiscal Policy Task Force and co-chairs the Education Finance Joint Working Group for the American Legislative Education Council and works tirelessly, I would add, for education legislation. And so welcome Dave Trabert to the podium to talk about the future of education.
Good morning. It is really a treat to be here. As you learned from Tracy's intro, if you don't know me, a few of you do, I'm a real nerd, so that all the data you have to dig into to really understand what's going on, I find it fun. I know I'm weird. When I started doing this at Kansas Policy Institute, which is almost 20 years ago now, I had not worked, obviously, in education. I was in a different industry. And so I went around and talked to a lot of people who had been involved in various ways, researchers. And one of the things that really stuck out was they said, because I was asking, what do we need to do? What are the issues in education? And it really struck me that it was a false sense of high achievement was one of the biggest barriers. And it makes sense. If you think everything's going well, why change? Keep doing it. It's working. But we have to be honest about where we are. And as Dr. Schmoker was talking about, you have to be able to monitor things. We have to be honest and stay on track and look at it. So there was some new developments this year we wanted to talk about. And if we could just go to that first slide here. As you're all aware, the State Board of Education recently approved new proficiency standards. There was a new state assessment test given in 2025, and the results came out. Now, Dr. Watson, the Education Commissioner, insists that rigor wasn't reduced. I'm not sure what he means by that. When they say standards weren't reduced, that's how words can be parsed. There's a difference between academic standards of what you're supposed to know and proficiency standards, which are basically how we're going to grade what you know. There's no question in our mind that the proficiency standard dramatically was reduced, and I want to show you why we think that right now. And I'll preface it with, this will come off as criticism. We hope it's constructive criticism, because we're not going to get where we need to go if we aren't able to be honest about where we are to begin with and be able to monitor progress. So there were, over the past 10, 12 years, you may have heard many people on the State Board of Education and Dr. Watson saying, we have some of the highest standards in the nation. And that was true. Had good standards. They equated to NAEP, the nation's report card, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, said they do a mapping study. periodically, and they map state proficiency standards to the national proficiency standard. And Kansas, in the last one that was done in 2022, in 3 of the 4 areas had state assessment proficiency that equated to proficient or a little bit better on the NAEP. Now, I want to make sure we understand proficient here. The NAEP definition of proficient is it represents solid academic performance, demonstrated competency over challenging subject matter. Whereas NAEP Basic, the next level down, denotes partial mastery of the knowledge and skills. Now, there's no right or wrong, but how many people think basic should be our target in Kansas? Good. But that's what we're doing. That's effectively what we've done with these new proficiency standards. Here's one example. This is the NAEP mapping study from 2022, and you can see the state that has the highest 8th grade reading proficiency standards. It's Kansas. Now, the gray bar in the middle of that graph is the range for basic, and you can see that most states have state proficiency standards that equate to basic on NAEP. There's a couple, Virginia and Iowa, that are below basic. Now, when you go look at their state assessment tests, they will tell you that 70 to 80% of their kids are proficient. Whereas if you look at the NAEP, it's in the 30s. And the reason is they have really low standards, the lowest in the country. Kansas and a couple others are right just a little bit above. That's what it had been in the past. Now, all along this time, and I'm going to go back to start with 2000, the National Assessment of Educational Progress, this is 8th grade reading. You can see it's pretty consistent. Somewhere in the low to mid 30s, and now recently it's dipped down into the mid 20s. Now, we're going to superimpose state assessment results over top of that. The first 2 years, it was right on target with the NAEP. And then in 2002, all of a sudden, Kansas went from 34% proficient to 65% proficient. What happened? We changed the proficiency standards. And they did it very deliberately because that was during the No Child Left Behind years. Remember that wonderful national initiative where 100% of kids are going to be proficient by 2014? Everybody in Congress who voted for that knew it was impossible. So Congress said, okay, states, you got to get the kids to proficient, but we'll let you decide the definition of proficient. And so, predictably, most states just really dumbed down their standards. And all of a sudden, it looks like, look what kind of progress we're making. So then over the next decade or so, we go from 65% gradually increasing to 85%. One place along there, I think it was around 2005, 2006, the standards were changed again, kept low, maybe reduced a little bit more. In 2014, the state went back to having high standards. We go from 85% proficient to 30%. Did the kids forget how to read in 1 year? Of course not. We went back to having high standards. And you'll notice, again, now we're back pretty much in line with what the nation's report card said. We were just a few points off. And then this year, last year the NAEP had 8th grade reading at 22%, 25%, and our state assessment said 22, very close. Now in 1 year we go to 40%. Now, the only thing that changed, the kids didn't change, the instruction methods didn't change, the test and the proficiency standards changed. And the danger in doing this is, as you can imagine, if you're in Iowa or Virginia, everybody thinks things are going great. Why should we change anything? And unfortunately, there are some states, and now Kansas has joined them, that want to reduce proficiency standards to make the numbers look better. So here's some of the district results. There's a handout. This is 8th grade, this is all 8th grade reading proficiency. In Wichita, it went from 13% to 27%. Shawnee Mission from 33 to 54%. See if I can do this. Oh, there we go. You can see these enormous gains that obviously aren't real. And the danger is that kids and teachers and school board members, parents, everybody is going to look at these gains and they're going to say, wow, things are really moving in the right direction, when in fact nothing's changed. Nothing has changed except how we're grading the test. Just yesterday, the ACT results came out. And the 10th grade improvements on the state assessment were about as phenomenal looking as the 8th grade. And yet the ACT says we went down again. Every independent test that we look at says that outcomes have been declining in Kansas over the last 10 years. In 2015, 32% of Kansas graduates were college ready in English, reading, math, and science. And that's not a high bar. That's, ACT says that equates to about a 75% chance of getting a C on an entry-level course. So we've gone from 32% to 17%. Our composite score went from 21.9 to 19.1. We set all-time low records on ACT this year, while our state assessments are telling us something quite different. The ACT test didn't change. Our state proficiency standards are what changed, and we're unfortunately getting a false sense of high improvement. Now, the good news here is that the legislature has legal authority to tell the Department of Education, no thank you. You're going to go back to the previous test and the previous high proficiency standards. Several states have been doing this. Kansas wasn't the only one. Oklahoma, interestingly, did lower their standards in '24, and then they put them back in place. They put the high standards back because of the public outcry that, look, you're just deceiving us. This is not helping anybody. That's what we need to have. So if we want to, we need to be able to return to high standards, and we're hoping and we're encouraging the legislature to do just that. And with that, I want to tell you why this is so important. Well, I was going to, but fortunately, we have Senator Renee Erickson here. Senator Erickson chairs the Senate Education Committee. She has been, most of her career has been in education. She's been a principal, a teacher. She's been involved with education basically her whole life, and she is a real champion for students. Senator Erickson led a lot of the efforts over the last few years to improve our performance, to pass laws that really encourage, give that positive nudge to the system to move forward. You know, these things that we're talking about here are unfortunate realities. We're not saying it's anyone's fault, but it is everyone's responsibility, we think, to be honest about where we are and put the changes in place we need so that every kid has an opportunity to get a good education in Kansas. So, Senator Erickson, would you like to come up and share some thoughts with us?
Well, good morning. What a great morning it's been so far. Wow, you know, you can see why I'm very excited about having Senator Hill on the Education Committee next session. He replaced a senator who took a position in the Trump administration. So he has not yet started his work in the Senate Education Committee, but I lobbied hard with the Senate President to say, I need him on my Education Committee. So I'm really looking forward to having Senator Hill there. I love how Dave cues up here, talk to your legislator, and then cue up the legislator, right? So I feel like I've kind of a target, but that's okay because he's absolutely right. You do need to hear from us. I don't have a PowerPoint. As a recovering teacher who sat through decades of in-service and professional development, I suffer, I admit, from PPSD, which is PowerPoint stress disorder. I love PowerPoints. I'm glad people use them, but I just can't quite bring myself to do it anymore. You've heard of death by PowerPoint. Well, so Dave asked me, and I'm honored to be here, first of all, to you school board members. Thank you, thank you, thank you for your service. I served on our local school board for 8 years. I know what that's like. I've walked in your shoes, and I want to say thank you for, stepping out and doing what's often a thankless job when you're trying to advocate and do what's right for students. It's not easy. The pay stinks, right? Although we did pass a bill that said you can vote to give yourself pay if you choose to do so. But yeah, we all know how that might be a little bit of a political landmine, right? So, but anyway, I truly want to say thank you, and thank you to those of you who are superintendents and continue to advocate on behalf of kids. So Dave asked me to cover basically 3 things, initiatives and bills that have gone in the legislature that you may have heard of. And then I want to open it up to questions. The blueprint for literacy. Okay, I loved Dr. Schmoker. He just queued up what I was going to say, and I don't think he knew it because it was part of a question. He said, you put stress on the system and maybe the system responds, right? Because we had been, in the legislature, we had been sitting there watching, as Dave pointed out, a decline in student outcomes. And we are repeatedly told by the state board and by KSDE that stay in our lane, write the check, and let them deal with that. Okay. Well, if you read Article 6 of the Constitution, that's not what it says by any stretch. I know that's what a lot of people want to believe, but that's not accurate. The legislature has ultimate authority for the scientific, vocational, and education outcome of the students of Kansas. That's what the Constitution says. Now, through statute, and the Constitution does have the state board in there with some of their responsibilities, but it is statute that the legislature has given the state board authority over those specific areas of curriculum, teacher licensure, and assessments. So we watched this progressive decline, and so we thought, we are in now a literacy crisis in our state. Depending on what numbers you look at and how you slice it, it's easy to say, well, 1/3 of our students are scoring level 1 out of 4, low 1 being the lowest on the state assessment. Well, it used to be that levels 3 and 4 were proficient, 1 and 2 weren't. Well, then they said, but level 2 is okay now. Again, moving the standard, not necessarily improving student outcome, but moving the standard. So if you combine 1 and 2, then we've got about 72% of our kids who are scoring in the bottom 2 levels in the ELA assessment on state assessment. Unacceptable. I serve on the Blueprint for Literacy Advisory Council, and we know from research, conservatively, 95% of all students given the right instruction and resources can learn to read by 3rd grade. There were some researchers that said that number's too high. They did a meta-analysis, said actually it's too low, 98% of all students given the right instruction and resources can learn to read. So the legislature looked at this, we've got to act. We have a crisis here. So the Blueprint for Literacy became law in April of 2024. Governor Kelly did sign it. It had widespread bipartisan support, and it did a couple of things. One thing it did, well, the goals. Let's talk about the goals. So our goals were, we are going to train all of our elementary teachers in the science of reading. What had happened previously has been talked about, right? We got away from phonics, the basic of phonics, phonological awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. We got away from those principles of how to teach reading, and we went to what is sometimes called a 3-cueing method, or an MSV method, which is meaning, syntax, and visual. So let me give you just a really quick example. So a student is reading, and the proverbial sentence they always use is, the horse ate the hay in the barn. And a student reads that, the house ate the hay in the barn. Okay, phonics, what would we do? We would say, okay, look at the word horse again, right? Let's sound it out, H-O-R, right? What 3Qing does is say, does that sound right? Does that make sense? And try to get it through that way rather than the phonetic way. So that's kind of the difference between how students were being taught and what we know works, which is the science of reading or structured literacy in teaching kids how to read. So we said, you're going to go back to the science of reading. We're going to train all teachers in that. And you absolutely cannot use 3Qing anymore. We know it doesn't work. We hope, and the goal is to have 50% of our grade 3 through 8 students at level 2 or above by 2033 through this. And we hope to have, 90% at 2 or above, 50% at what we typically said was proficient, levels 3 and 4. So 90% at 2 or above, 50% at levels 3 and 4, okay, by 2033. So that's kind of where we're at. We're in that process of training teachers. Now, how we did this, we gave the Board of Regents, which is the post-secondary group that's responsible for that, how to train our teachers before they get into the classroom. So a couple things we did. We're going to tell universities, you guys have to come up with a couple of courses that are going to make sure teachers know how to teach science of reading. And then for teachers already in the classroom, KSDE had already started this somewhat through what they call letters training, and they used ESSER funds or COVID money to get that up and running. So teachers are being trained. Teachers who are learning to be teachers are now taking these courses, and we're hoping to see the fruits of that labor. What you will hear about a lot, and what I'm sure you've heard about in school boards and superintendents, is that the legislature cut funding for the Blueprint for Literacy. So let's just set that straight. So in the bill that was passed in 2024 appropriated $10 million for fiscal year 2025, period, to get this initiative up and going, okay? Never appropriated it beyond 2025. What a lot of districts and the word out there is, well, we should have had 10 million every year in perpetuity. Was never the case. Anyone who knows the legislature, you can finish this sentence for me, right? Whenever you write a bill and you put appropriations in it, there's always this little phrase that hangs a lot of people up. And it's 3 words, subject to appropriations. So we can put in that we're going to allow 10 million for this, subject to appropriations. We gave 10 million, like the bill said, in 2025. And we actually gave 2 million for 2026, 2 million more than we had to. But what you hear is that we cut it. We absolutely did not. So, but that's the whole goal of the Blueprint for Literacy. We did cut back on some of the goals. So the other thing that Dave wanted me to talk about is in 2022, the legislature, also recognizing that we have a literacy crisis, enacted the Every Child Can Read Act. And this is really key for you school board members. If you're not familiar with the Every Child Can Read Act, it's, and I'm sorry I've scribbled all over this, it's 1 page. Pretty easy. If you look in the statute books, it's 72-3262. It's 1 page. And what it really did was what we've heard a lot about this morning. 3rd grade is key. We've known that. That's nothing new, right? We need to have kids reading on 3rd grade. So it emphasizes that. And in order to emphasize that, it says, school boards, you guys have some responsibilities. 1, you guys are going to have to measure student success. You have to have a method of formative and summative assessment to measure how kids are doing in literacy by 3rd grade. You also have to have interventions in place for those who are behind. And teachers have to communicate this at least twice a year in detail, it's in the bill, to parents, so parents are aware. Let's get that parental involvement. And then you have to report to KSDE how many kids you have that aren't on target for 3rd grade, what you're doing, what interventions you're using, and what those outcomes are. Okay, that's the Every Child Can Read Act. If you're not familiar with that as a board member, you need to be, because it's very clearly says local districts are responsible for this. Okay? So know that. So the legislature has been trying to lean in on literacy for quite a while. The last topic, and then if I have time, I'll open it up for a few questions. I also chair the Education Funding Task Force. The current school funding formula expires June 30th of 2027. So we are in the process of rewriting the school funding formula. We've been meeting since January and laying the groundwork, because come July 1st, 2027, we have to have a new school funding formula. Well, easy, right? Y'all familiar with that school funding formula? Yeah. The people on the task force, Senator Hill is on it. It's made up of legislators, people from KSDE, superintendents, Jim Porter from the State Board of Education is on there. So, all the stakeholders we tried to gather in, or who have a say in this, and we've been working, and what we've basically been doing up to this point is taking a look at our current weightings. We have a lot of weightings, right? We have the base state aid per pupil, then we add on a lot of weightings to come up with how much we fund for students. So we've been looking at every aspect of our funding formula in great detail. We've been having staff do runs. What if we changed this? What would it look like by district? Well, some districts would get more, some would get less, and so we talk about that. We've looked in depth at what other states are doing and how they fund education. Missouri just rewrote their state funding formula. Oklahoma's made a lot of changes. So are there things we can glean from them? And so that's kind of where we are. I will tell you, starting in January, we will start looking at making concrete changes. I can kind of tell you a couple things that I think have some pretty good consensus on, and one involves the low and high enrollment weighting. The low enrollment weighting, we all agree, makes some sense for small districts. The high, not so much. I mean, there's no Goldilocks in this. There's no, we got baby bear, mama bear, and daddy bear. It's all baby or daddy. There's no mama bear that says this size of district is just right. Every district currently gets either low or high enrollment weighting. So, and there's a lot of cutoffs that we're looking at, So we have dug in a lot to that. But the one thing I really want you guys to know, lots of rumors, as you can imagine, lots of speculation. So I want to just set a couple things straight. Early on, I was at a high school in my district, and one of the administrators came up and said, I hear you guys are cutting every penny for districts with 250 and lower kids. I'm like, well, that's news to me. Never, ever had any conversation around that. But I know that when you start talking about how we're going to finance schools, people get nervous, and before you know it, the rumor mill has gone nuts. So I would just encourage you, any of you, school board members, superintendents, anyone, if you hear something and you're like, is that really what they're looking at, or is that what they're doing, please contact me, contact a member of the task force, and it's on the Kansas Legislative website, and ask. Because we will tell you the truth. Yeah, we're looking at that, or no, we're not. I'll tell you one thing we're looking at very, very hard, and rightfully so in my opinion, is at-risk funding. We spend over $532 million a year for those at-risk kids. And every indicator says not only are they not improving, they're getting worse. $532 million. What child is more at risk than those who aren't reading by third grade? So I very much think we ought to take that at-risk funding, some of it, and put it down to our K through 3 literacy initiatives to make sure those kids are reading by third grade. I think that's a great use of at-risk money personally. So conversations like that, where can we, because I'll tell you one thing we're focusing on is not how much money we're putting in, but what are the student outcomes that we're getting for that money. And we're going to put our money which yields results for our students. That's a hill I'll die on all day long. It's got to go to make a difference for our kids and improve their outcomes. So with that, I'm happy to answer a few questions if there's time.
Thank you, Senator Erickson. We'll ask Dave to come on up and see if there are questions that you have for Senator Erickson or Dave. Come to you.
Thank you very much for being here. You talk about rumors, and I think I read that you are looking at the potential of requiring a certain level of reading in third grade, and maybe requiring that a student be retained if they haven't met that level. Are you looking at that in your committee?
I'll tell you what, yeah, we are looking, and we're looking at what Mississippi has done, what Florida has done, what we know has worked. And one of the key things they have done, and I know Commissioner Watson talked about this in the state board meeting, which we've been advocating for some time, is one, if you're not reading by third grade, what do we know about those kids who aren't reading on grade level at third grade? What are the chances of them catching up? Slim to none. We know the trajectory for them. They very likely aren't going to catch up by the time they graduate from high school. So what we want to do is make sure we have the resources, the training going into that. But if a student isn't reading by the end of third grade, I agree with Dr. Schmoker. We've got to look really hard at saying, is it really in their best interest to move them up to a level where if they can't do third grade, how are they going to do fourth grade and fifth grade and sixth grade? So are we setting them up for failure, or do we want to make sure we get it right? So I think we need what Mississippi has done, which I think has been key to their success, is they have summer literacy camps. And kids who are behind, they have to go to a summer literacy camp where they get immersed in depth, and they have found that to be extremely successful to get those kids back on track before they go into fourth grade. So I'm all for any of those that get those kiddos on track. Dave?
Yeah, if I could add to that, it sounds like when you say hold back if they're not reading by the end of third grade, that's just the only thing that's done. That's not. What Florida did, what Mississippi has done, is start with interventions in the first grade, in kindergarten, so that there's measurements all along, and parents are notified that, your child is in the first grade, but at this level is in danger of not being able to move on to fourth grade. So they try to bring every pressure to bear. It's not like a one-time cutoff. It's a constant monitoring and encouragement and providing assistance to get kids to where they are. Because the key is, at the end of the third grade, that's when up to 3 grades you're learning how to read. From there on out, you're reading to learn. That's why it is so critical. So it's a proven method, and there's no right or wrong way to do it, but we know that we're giving diplomas to kids who can't read them. Okay, we have to do something about that.
Yeah, before coming to this, I took the time to sit down and read the education statutes and the Kansas statutes annotated, and I found a lot of vague hand waving, but there were no concrete standards for anything. There was lots of authority given out, but what I'm trying to say is we need statutory standards for curriculum per each grade, per each subject, and we need to set out a standard so we can decide when there's negligence or non-performance. The other thing is we need to have some sort of inspector general over these bureaucracies, because if you ask a bureaucracy to regulate itself, it won't happen.
Is there a question? Or
The question is, can we get these things set out in statute instead of just having vague prescriptions?
Well, that could be done. As Senator Erickson referenced, the Kansas Constitution does give the legislature, they could do that. They have allowed, because the state school board has general supervision, so they have allowed the state school board to do that. And I believe that there have been some standards, decent standards put in place. I mean, the proficiency standards in the past equated to proficient at the national level. Where the problem has come in is it's one thing to have standards, it's quite another to make sure that districts are actually implementing them. And both the Constitution and the statutes say that the accreditation system is supposed to be built on improvement, academic improvement. Unfortunately, the State Board of Education has not done that for a long time. There's no requirement. That's one of the problems with passing a law. You assume that if you or I violate it, there's a consequence. If a government entity violates a law, there's generally no consequence. You can spend money illegally, you can not have improvement as required, and nothing changes.
Is that because of the public duty doctrine?
No, the reason that it's just a choice, in this case by the State Board of Education, to not enforce, like the Senator mentioned, the at-risk law. The law very clearly says, and 2 state audits have confirmed, that this money is not being used for above and beyond services for kids who are academically at risk. You're supposed to follow state laws in order to be accredited.
Is there a right to, is there a private right of enforcement? Can you sue for negligence for failure to educate?
Well, I'm just a recovering accountant, so I can't answer that legal question. But that would be, I think, an enormous challenge to do that.
Other, oh,
Sorry.
I wasn't sure.
No, yeah. So if you really want to stir up a hornet's nest this session, I've seen where in some other states they've put forth legislation and changed it so instead of everything, you know, the NASB for school board members like us, the National Association of School Board, and the other entity that won't be named, no, KASB, pretty much has a monopoly, right, on the training, except now we have KSBRC. Some other states, right now, it's each school board determines whether they're going to be a member of KSB, right? And like our school board has been like a 4-3 vote the last couple years, and we've stayed in. But what some states have done is they've switched that and given the autonomy to each school board member. So say like we pay close to $14,000 a year for KSB and we have 7 members. So each member, they passed legislation to change it where each member can decide whether to be a member of KSB or to use that money, that say $2,000 for their own training. And it kind of gets rid of that monopoly that feeds into the National Association of School Boards and KSB, and I just wondered if the legislature would be interested in stirring up that nest.
Before you answer, if they did it, you wouldn't be spending your $2,000 with us. You might spend it to travel to go somewhere, but we don't charge for our services, and that wouldn't change. The only thing we charge for is a new service we've implemented, which is conducting superintendent searches. And that's really just covering our out-of-pocket cost to do that. But so that's not I didn't give her $20 to say, get us some funding.
I'm not familiar with that, but in general, I'm a free market kind of person, and I like that idea. I think when there's monopolies in any context, it's generally not good for the people we intend to serve. I also read the face of Representative Megan Steele, who's in the room, and I saw her light up a bit, so that may be something that we look at, but honestly, not familiar with it, but on the surface, I'd dig in, not opposed to that.
Other questions? Oh, yes, sir.
Senator, would you mind sharing what your personal top 2 to 3 priorities are in the rewrite of the finance formula, if you're at liberty to share this?
Oh, of course. Number 1, improve student outcomes. This money should be going to maximize student academic outcomes. And however that looks, I'll tell you, I think, I'll just be blunt because that's how I am. People who know me know I'm just blunt. There is no appetite. So let me just reassure everyone. There is currently no appetite to cut funding for education. What there is an appetite for is shifting the money to maximize outcomes for kids. There's a big appetite for that because we cannot continue on the trajectory we're on. We are all up to almost $20,000 per student in the state of Kansas. And our outcomes are going 17% on the ACT. Now we can look at those numbers on the graph and just go, yeah, well, that's numbers on the graph. Those are our kids. Our economic well-being is tied to that as a state. A new report just came out, research just came out. Do you know what the number one, I didn't know this, I've been in education for decades. The number one predictor of a state's economic well-being, and they have said this is shockingly definitive, is tied to what in our education system, do you know? 8th grade math. 8th grade math scores. You want to get depressed, go look at our 8th grade math scores. When we can talk about, oh, a third of our kids or 72% of our kids aren't proficient in reading, that's 150,000 Kansas kids sitting in our classroom. 150,000. Divide this room and say 72% of you can't read. Would that alarm you a little bit? I so appreciated Dr. Schmucker because here's what I heard. I've even heard it from people this morning in casual conversation. I even heard the discussion at the state board. We're going to start a pilot and we're going to start it slow. And then in 3 years, we're going to see if it's making an impact. And in 5 years, maybe we'll roll it out. People, I'm here to tell you, we need a sense of urgency when it comes to the education of our students. And I love Dr. Schmuck. He said, these are things that make an impact immediately. In 1 year, we need to change our mindset from, oh, it's going to take 3 to 5 to 10 years to see if this makes any difference. I'm telling you, by then, another shiny trend in education is going to come along and we'll move on and spend a ton of money to do this new shiny thing, not knowing if it works or not. That's the pattern we've been on. So my top priorities is making sure we stop that. We know how to teach kids how to read. Let's get to the business of doing it, putting resources where they go to make sure that happens. Then we need to conquer numeracy, because it's not in much better shape than literacy, and get our kids the education that taxpayers are paying for and they deserve because our state's economic well-being and their independent well-being depends on it. So I'll get off my soapbox, but that's it in a nutshell.
Oh, one more, or a couple more, I guess.
Well, Renee, I appreciate your passion, and I share a lot of the same things. I'm just really concerned about what we heard from Dr. Schmoker, is that the content and what we're doing in the classroom is the issue. And I know that a lot of teachers are frustrated. Some of the more veteran ones are retiring because they're tired of it. And that's what we need to focus on. And I think that superintendents and local boards, a lot of you here, you need to be looking at your curriculums. I think that is a key to me from the state board level, that, and looking at, 10,000-foot view, we have to be looking at what is actually happening in the classroom and what kind of material and what the teachers are, how they're supported. Because some of this, time spent, time wasted, then you end up having kids going home and nothing happened that day. That is really key.
Dennis, if I could, I agree with that. But there's also a responsibility, I'd say, at the state board level to hold districts accountable for improvement. They can decide what they need to do to get there, but until there is you have to go from here to there in this amount of time, it's not going to happen. And the power of accreditation, taking that away from districts if they don't get there, and it's not a punishment, it's to ensure that the kids get educated. You have the general supervision. I think the state board can go a long way in setting that tone.
And I'll just add very quickly, listen, the power is at the local level. Now, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but you've got to get your families engaged in knowing. Parents, here's what we know. parents don't want to believe that they're sending their child to a school that's not educating them properly. How does that make you feel as a parent? So here's what they do when you do surveys. My kid's school's great. Every other school stinks, right? They don't want to face the fact of where they're sending their child. But what we've got to do, Dennis, is get the powers at the local level. We can write all the laws and fill up volumes of laws, but unless they're enacted at the local level in the classroom, impacting, and our teachers, I'll tell you what, our teachers, God bless our teachers. If it wasn't for teachers, our effective teachers, because there's a difference, our effective teachers are the only thing that's kept this whole system afloat over the years. And hats off and God bless them. We got to get rid of our ineffective ones. Our effective ones are doing the heavy lifting, but they're rowing against the whole system here, and they need our support and they need our backing, and then hopefully we'll see those results come along. But the power's at the local level.
So this may not be within your area, but how are we addressing chronic absenteeism? Because all of the interventions in the world are wonderful, and summer literacy camps are wonderful, but you have to get the students there in order to achieve this outcome of reading by the end of third grade. So what can we do to address chronic absenteeism? Because I think that plays a huge part in whether or not we achieve these standards.
Thank you for that great segue, because again, we have laws on the books about truancy, but unless they're enacted at the local level, I mean, those have got to happen at the local level, and because we have laws, we have truancy laws on the book. Very quickly, because I could talk all day. One of the things that shocked me along this line of thinking is I was in Great Bend a couple weeks ago, and I found out that districts are saying kids do not have to be potty trained to come to elementary school. Is that something you all are aware of? For this exact reason. Well, we got to get them in there. They're missing instruction. You want to talk about teachers retiring faster than you can shake a stick at, and I was told there's a second grader who is having his pants changed 3-4 times a day. But teachers are not going to, what are we doing? So there's a lot to it, but we have laws. It's got to be enforced at the local level.
I got a question. I think you kind of touched on this, but is there, it seems like there needs to be some effort in the schools of education on getting our teachers trained. Maybe simplify a little bit. It's gotten very, I'll just say I have a daughter who went through school of education and felt like she didn't learn anything. And she's no longer teaching. But I feel like some of our teachers, our new teachers, are not trained in teaching. Just basic, like we were discussing, like, classroom management and when in charge, be in charge, and that kind of thing. So is there some effort and focus on revamping some of the things that go on in the schools of education?
I think we talked about this, about how teachers aren't trained in teaching. And any of us who've been in the classroom, there were a lot of hands that went up. How long did it take you to feel comfortable that you had a grip on what you were doing? I took in my teacher ed program the history of education. Probably good to know. Did it help me manage when I had a kid stand up and yell profanity at me? Well, that history of education did me a lot of good. The best thing we can do, in my opinion, and what I did as a principal when I had a teacher that was struggling, number one, leadership matters in our buildings. And just because you're a good teacher doesn't make you a good administrator. I'm just going to say it. Should you be a good teacher? Yes. Are all good teachers leadership potential? No. So that's the first thing. Secondly, when I had a teacher that was struggling, and those new teachers, it takes 2 to 3 years to even get your feet underneath you to know. I mean, you are just living by the skin of your teeth your first 2 years, hoping that some kid doesn't get hurt or maimed in your class. Nevertheless, standards and outcomes. But the best thing we can do, in my opinion, is spend less time teaching the history of education and get a highly effective teacher and get those new teachers. I'd rather them have a year of being in the classroom co-teaching with a highly effective teacher than do history of education and student teaching. You know what my student teaching was? I was the student teacher for the wrestling coach who decided to make that his permanent plan period all day and stuck me in front of the kids. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. I guess you throw you in the deep end, you learn something. But it wasn't exactly a mentoring relationship, so.
The legislature did, in the Blueprint for Literacy, require universities to start teaching, using the science of reading to prepare teachers. But again, there are some things that you can do at the local level to put some stress on the system. The National Council on Teacher Quality examines like 700 universities across the country on the effectiveness of their teacher preparation programs. And some are really good and some are really bad, and that's in every state, including Kansas. So like 8th grade math is the tipping point. Emporia State and Kansas State get Fs from the National Council on Teacher Quality. Other universities get A's in Kansas. So one thing that school boards could do is let these colleges of education know, you need to up your game or we can't hire teachers from your school. That gets their attention. They have to change.
Well, I know there's a lot that we could continue to talk about, and thanks so much, Senator Erickson and Dave.